What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and just today we got a new Meta Watch article and video interview fresh from the field at the US Open Tacoma GW Warhammer 40k event, where the current metagame, the metagame and experience of the event, and upcoming changes to the game were discussed. And most importantly, for the topic of this video, is that we got some confirmations that new erratas and balance changes would be coming relatively soon. Now, first off, we got a confirmation that we should be expecting next week a new errata.
We're also doing an errata update that's coming in the next week or so that deals with some of the things that people have been asking loads of us as judges here at the event about, particular maybe weapon options and things in index cards. So hopefully, the next couple of weeks, people will see some movement on some of those, and that will impact everyone's play. It
sounds like, for those of you who are hoping that this may be some sort of rebalance of the game, this is only going to be a technical errata. So what it's going to do is answer a lot of frequently asked questions and address some typos that still exist within the indexes of the game. We've discussed a lot of them on this channel. There are some open questions. A lot of data sheets in the game are slightly borked. You can look at Space Wolves, where a lot of their war gear options are unfortunately typoed. So what I think we're going to be seeing is a lot of that technical update. Now, that said, also in the discussion was a new balance change.
We will be doing our first balance kind of sweep of the new edition in September. About 5, 6, maybe 7 weeks time.
That's just around the corner.
It's really not that far away. I think sometimes, certainly me, like people are like, oh, September. I'm like, oh, that's ages. And it's really not, right? It's like, what, middle of July now. So, and that will certainly address some of the spikier things that we've seen.
Now, it doesn't sound like we're getting one of these for a little while, but one is scheduled for September, and this is going to be the first of the quadra-annual.
The word is quarterly, you big idiot.
Balance erratas for Warhammer 40k. We're expecting one every quarter, and since 10th edition came out nominally in June, 3 months from there is going to be September, so we're looking at about 6 to 8 weeks before the next update. And we got a little bit of an inkling on what we could expect to see change.
So Eldari, Imperial Knights, Gene Stealer Cults are definitely one to watch. Eldar are good, but they're not dominant. All right, so other factions certainly have some play into them. But we're definitely going to keep an eye on Eldari. They're still quite efficient, particularly if you're playing your secondary objective game. Quite a lot of the secondary objectives involve getting the right people into the right place at the right time. Eldar are really fast, so they're really good at that. They also don't sacrifice firepower. So I think some other factions, if you want to be fast and you want to be in the right place, you kind of trade off your firepower for your speed. Eldari don't really do that. So they're definitely on the watch list.
He mentioned Eldari as specifically having access to both strong firepower and maneuverability, especially with units like Shadow Specters and stratagems like Phantasm, allowing this army to maneuver itself around the table, be incredibly difficult for its opponent to interact with, and because of the Strands of Fate mechanic, which was nerfed previously, and with how those nerfs are carrying over into actual gameplay, alongside the plethora of free rerolls granted by the Battle Host detachment ability, they are able to hit dramatically above their weight class while being extremely difficult for the opponent to engage with. Now, I do think that those are some big issues with the Eldari faction, biggest being probably the points value of these units, and it sounds like that this September update is likely going to be a points value change. I don't know if we're going to see wholesale erratas or changes to anything. Now, especially since a lot of this discussion was based around the results at the US Open Tacoma, I was interested to hear Imperial Knights being levied within the discussion, especially since the US Open Tacoma terrain was incredibly good for towering units. Since they didn't have a lot of very tall or true line of sight blocking walls, towering units could basically run rampant in this format, where they're able to draw line of sight to most things on the table. Not everything, but most units that are not small infantry that could hide in crevices and things were going to get shot at by towering units. Imperial Knights also saw some additional dramatic nerfs, not only in the points adjustment to towering units, increasing all of their points values that we saw 2 weeks ago, but also the event there ruled, and this is another errata that I think we will probably see made manifest within the rules in the next week, that their Lay Low the Tyrant's ability rerolls a single hit roll and a single wound roll. It does seem like that's the intention of the ability, but it's not actually stated by the rule. And it can be interpreted both that it rerolls all hit rolls and wound rolls of 1 or a single one. That said, Imperial Knights did do fairly well at the US Open Tacoma within the bracket of top 32. We saw 5 Imperial Knights players make it to that stage, being tied for the second highest representation with Adeptus Custodes. Last but certainly not least, they did discuss changes to Genestealer cults.
So there's a couple of things that Genestealers can do that maybe catch their opponent off guard. Because they have this, it's a brilliant ability. We're really happy with the way that their army rule works. So effectively, when you're playing Genestealer cults, it feels like you're fighting this like endless horde of cultists that just keep boiling up from the sewers and taking over. They can really efficiently get across the board and therefore dominate kind of the space, and when you kill them they just come back and do it again. Their demo charges are probably a bit too efficient. So there's a couple of things that we're keeping an eye on for those factions.
Now, in my opinion, Genestealer cults are at least as powerful as Eldari, if not dramatically more so, and certainly more powerful than Imperial Knights. But given that this interview came directly after the experience at the US Open Tacoma, and it didn't seem like Genestealer cults did particularly well at that event. And I can't give you a real concrete reason for that, since they do seem to be dominating a lot of events otherwise. Eldar are still in the driver's seat of the metagame right now, but as more people pick up the Genestealer cult technology, I have a sneaking suspicion that the win rate of that faction will increase precipitously. They discussed how they were happy with the cult ambush army rule and the theme that it presented on the table of having to deal with hundreds and hundreds of cultists rising from the ruins of whatever city that you're fighting in, but the amount of movement available to these units and the efficient damage output of these units Stu believed to be too strong. And I, of course, agree with him. Well, again, I'm not sure if we're going to see mechanical changes. What we could see is increases in cost to the unit that best abuse the cult ambush rule, or we could potentially even see some war gear options getting points valued associated with them. But I have no idea if that's the direction that the team wants to go in. In the discussion, it was mentioned that about half the factions in the game are within the Goldilocks zone of 45 to 55%, and will most likely not see changes.
Got currently about half, certainly here at Tacoma, about half the factions sit within that like Goldilocks zone. And there's a bunch that sit below that.
I think if you are not within those top 3 or maybe the bottom 5, I don't think there's going to be too many erratas to those armies, unless something dramatically changes between now and September. In addition, they also discussed the bottom 5 factions that they're looking at for receiving buffs.
So Leagues of Votan are having a pretty tough time at this event. As are Blood Angels, sorry Paul. I know, straight to the heart,
Wearing
right?
my
representing
TV pin
representing.
Here, so, yeah.
And a couple of other factions that have, so Adeptus Mechanicus, Death Guard. So there's a couple that we know, both in terms of their performance on the tabletop, in terms of their win rate, but also just the player experience aren't quite where we want them to be.
Now, I really appreciate that we are discussing both nerfs for the top factions in the game and buffs for all of the smaller factions, because, I mean, if I'm going to be honest, I do think that the bottom factions are almost more problematic than the top ones. Well, the top ones are incredibly easy to win with and super powerful. The heart of the problem is that there are more factions at the bottom than there are at the top, and the factions at the bottom can't even compete with factions somewhere around the middle, and that's super problematic. Every faction in the game should be able to compete at that level, and some of them clearly don't. So if you are one of those bottom factions, I would be expecting to see some buffs come September. So let me know down in the comment section what you would like to see out of these upcoming changes. I do hope that we get some little balance tweaks in next week's errata, but what I have to imagine is that it is entirely a technical brush up. We'll just have to see though, and let me know down in the comment section what you want to see changed in these upcoming updates. Big thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to everybody who supports the channel either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are great and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.